"We're not paying for your little $2,000 vacation," my boss said, denying my work travel. A letter from our largest client arrived during the board meeting. The CEO read it, his expression froze. He slid it to our lawyer, whose only question was, "Where is she?" I was elbow deep in a shipping manifest from Shenzhen, trying to track down a pallet of misrouted fan blades, when Tyler leaned over my cubicle wall with the grace of a man who thinks cologne is personality. "Hey Britt, I need you to fix whatever's going on with Omega Plastics. They're whining again." Whining. That's what he called a full stop on a $1.2 million supply contract. I nodded like always, scribbled it down, and quietly rerouted the shipment using 3 favors, 1 bribe fine, expedited customs fee, and a 6-minute phone call in broken Mandarin. Problem solved. Tyler would later tell the board it was his pressure tactics that got things moving. That was my life. A human band-aid for corporate paper cuts, the quiet fixer. No spotlight, no fanfare, just fluorescent lights, tepid coffee, and a LinkedIn page that hadn't been updated since Bush was in office. Vendors knew my name. The forklift drivers in Des Moines sent me Christmas cards. But upstairs, I was as noticed as the gum stuck under the break room table. And hey, since you've made it this far, let me just pause the existential dread for 1 second to say something real quick. If you like hearing stories like this, the kind your boss wouldn't want you listening to, hit that subscribe button and throw us a like. 90% of y'all binge these tales like vending machine peanuts without subscribing. It's free, and it genuinely keeps this caffeine-fueled team from jumping into a shredder feet first. Alright, back to the chaos. So yeah, I kept things moving. When our Detroit plant had a hydraulic seal crisis that threatened to delay 3 weeks of output, I called in a favor from a Serbian vendor I hadn't spoken to since 2008. He still remembered me, called me Brittany of the Blizzard because I once navigated an entire procurement deal during a snowstorm using only burner phones and sticky notes. I got the seals flown in on a private courier jet. Tyler sent a thank you email to himself. My reward? A last-minute calendar invite to a leadership roundtable on vendor visibility hosted by Tyler, where I was asked to take notes and fetch a fun sparkling water for the VP of Marketing. I grabbed her a room temperature LaCroix, typed up 12 pages of logistics insight, and watched as Tyler plagiarized my summary into a PowerPoint that somehow managed to use Comic Sans. But I didn't complain. I didn't raise my voice. I kept showing up. Early mornings, late nights. I became the department's invisible net. Everyone fell and I caught them. Then came the email. It was from Lazar Kovacs, Hungarian founder of a legacy microchip supplier we'd been using for years. One of those behind-the-scenes companies no one in the C-suite remembered, but without which our top-selling product wouldn't even turn on. He was cordial, but blunt. Their factory was shifting production priorities. If we wanted to stay on the buyer list, we needed a rep at the annual Eastern European Vendor Summit, in person. In Baykesk Saba, I forwarded the message to Tyler with a simple request, approval for a $2,000 travel expense. I laid out the urgency. I warned that this was our last shot to lock down supply for a component that powered over 40% of our revenue. I didn't even add per diem. He called me into his office and laughed. $2,000? For what? A sightseeing trip and some goulash? We're not paying for your little vacation, Brittany. I didn't respond. Just smiled. That tight-lipped, frozen smile women learn in middle management when we're being slapped with a condescending insult disguised as financial prudence. He waved me off and muttered something about real priorities. That night I sat in my dark kitchen, still in my work slack, sipping flat Diet Coke and listening to my dog snore. My laptop was open. I stared at flights. Economy class, 11-hour layover in Munich, middle seat. I booked it, on my own dime. I took 3 days of PTO and burned through the last of my Marriott points on a 3-star hotel with a lobby that smelled like boiled meat and unresolved trauma. Before I left, I pulled an old folder from my filing cabinet, one I hadn't touched in years. It had photos of a rollout I led back in 2012, when Kovacs' daughter had flown to the States for an on-site audit and her interpreter bailed. I stepped in, helped her navigate a system crash, medical scare and a 12-hour flight delay. We stayed in touch. Christmas cards, the occasional happy birthday email. I didn't know it yet, but that forgotten kindness, buried under a decade of ignored emails and forgotten thank yous, was about to become my golden ticket. The morning after I booked my self-funded flight to Bekeshkala, the office felt heavier, like the walls knew what I was about to do and were holding their breath. I moved like a ghost through the cubicles, dodging awkward small talk and microwave bacon fumes, all while mentally triple-checking my pitch. See, the thing about legacy components is they're not sexy. They don't make flashy investor decks or headline product launches, but without them, your best-selling product becomes an overpriced paperweight. Ours was a pressure calibration unit. Don't bother Googling it unless you love insomnia. What mattered was that it brought in over $100 million annually and was powered by one very specific chip made in one very specific Eastern European factory. That chip wasn't manufactured anywhere else, at least not yet, and that's what woke me up in a cold sweat the night before. The new vendor list Kovacs had quietly slipped into his email. It showed active discussions with a Chinese conglomerate and a German startup that had more venture capital than common sense. Both were circling. Hard. Kavox was getting courted like the last girl in a Baptist youth group dance. And we didn't even RSVP. So I did what any logistics manager with a death wish and a broken printer does. I put together a one-pager proposal in 11-point Arial with actual bullets, not those stupid pastel smart art shapes Tyler loved, outlining why this vendor summit wasn't a vacation. It was a Godam firewall, a last stand, a $2,000 insurance policy against the total collapse of our golden goose. I even added a chart. Tyler likes charts, especially ones with arrows. When I slid the proposal across his desk, he didn't even look up from whatever Slack thread he was pretending to read. You want what? Approval for travel to the summit. It's a chance to lock down a supply agreement. Kavox's, he held up a hand. The universal sign for I've stopped listening, but I still want to feel superior. We're not paying for your little $2,000 vacation, Brittany. It wasn't the words, it was the tone. Like I was some middle-aged groupie trying to sneak into Coachella with a counterfeit wristband. Like I was wasting company money when he just expensed $500 for team building escape room where 3 interns got locked in a broom closet for an hour because no one knew the capital of Latvia. I opened my mouth, then closed it. What was the point? I could have recited every metric, every forecast, every fragile link in our supply chain. Tyler had already filed this under emotional female nonsense. I knew that look. I'd seen it before. Hell, I'd trained myself not to cry under that look. So I smiled. That dead inside, teeth-clenched smile women master around men who think charisma is interrupting someone mid-sentence. Understood, I said. Thanks for the clarity. I walked out of his office feeling like a balloon someone let go of mid-helium fill. But under that, something simmered. Not anger. Not even betrayal. Just precision. Like I'd finally stopped waiting for approval from a system built to ignore me. Back at my desk, I emailed HR to confirm my PTO request. They replied with the usual automated form. I submitted it, attached a fake conference itinerary I mocked up in Canva, and made a note to bring back an airport souvenir so no one asked questions. Something with paprika or a communist cartoon dog, and I ordered new business cards. Just 100. Matte finish, burgundy font. Name, Brittany Sharp. Title, Independent Vendor Relations Consultant Company. Sharp Point Logistics LLC. I figured if I was going to be invisible to my own company, I might as well be visible to theirs. By noon, I had booked my hotel. By 2 p.m., I'd made a quiet call to Alina, the founder's daughter. I hadn't spoken to her in 6 years. She picked up on the first ring. Brittany? Alina? I got your father's email. I'd like to come to the summit. Silence. Then a low chuckle. You always show up when it matters. I smiled for real that time. Not the workplace version. The real one, I always try. My PTO was approved with all the enthusiasm of a software update nobody asked for. No questions, no follow-ups, just a bland email from HR confirming the dates. I doubt Tyler even noticed, or cared. 3 days later, I was wedged into a seat in row 32 of a budget airline that smelled like wet carpet and bad decisions, knees jammed against the tray table, listening to a Slovakian baby scream like he knew I was flying toward a professional Hail Mary. The itinerary, Columbus to Munich, then a connection to Debrecen, followed by a 2-hour bus ride to Bexiga, a place that sounds like a sneeze and looks like a postcard from 1987 that got lost in the mail. I landed jet-lagged, half-deaf from the engine hum, and smelling like airplane nuts and existential dread. The hotel lobby had yellowed wallpaper, a rotary phone at the desk, and a vending machine selling off-brand cigarettes and shampoo. But it didn't matter, because the moment I checked in there was a note waiting for me at the desk, written in blocky, deliberate handwriting. Dinner on the terrace. 8 p.m. LK Lazar Kovacs, a man who ran his factory like a monastery, and whose handshake was worth more than most NDAs. I hadn't seen him in person since the rollout in 2012. Back then, we were piloting a joint systems integration in Cleveland. His daughter, Alina, was shadowing the process as part of some next-gen leadership program. She was barely 22, fresh off a plane, wide-eyed and wearing heels that didn't stand a chance against the greasy factory floor. Entire rollout was a disaster. Our local IT team ghosted halfway through day one. The temperature controls malfunctioned, the translation software glitched, and someone, probably Barry from facilities, left a porn tab open on the central monitor. The cherry on top? Alina got violently ill after a lunch burrito and ended up curled in the corner of the warehouse break room, green as a stoplight and shaking like a leaf. Everyone panicked. Everyone except me. I found a space heater, a blanket from the lost and found bin, and a pharmacy 2 blocks down that sold something vaguely resembling anti-nausea meds. I sat with her, made her tea, and called her father from my personal phone when no one else would. She clutched my hand for 2 hours and cried from the embarrassment. She was supposed to be proving herself. Instead, she was puking in a trash bin behind a forklift. When Kovacs arrived, he looked at me, not with corporate thanks, with something deeper, respect maybe or recognition. The kind you only get when you show up at someone's worst moment and don't flinch. Back in the present, the terrace dinner was quiet, just the two of us. No aides, no translators. Just grilled pork, warm palinka, and the sound of old clock towers chiming in the background. "You came," he said simply, eyes wrinkling with a faint smile. "No one else was going to," I replied. He poured the palinka. "We didn't toast. Just drank. They want me to move production," he said after a long silence. "Germany offers money. China offers scale, but neither offers what I actually want." I waited. "Trust," he finished. "I want trust. You helped my daughter when she was not useful to you. You acted with care when no one was watching. You remember people, not just numbers." I said nothing, letting the words settle like dust. "Will you represent us?" he asked suddenly. "Here, in America. Not your company? You, personally?" The wind shifted. I felt it, not metaphorically, but literally. A gust from the east carried the scent of steel and old rain. Something about it made my spine stiffen. "I'm not a lawyer," I said slowly. "I don't have distribution experience. I'm just a logistics manager." He waved it off. "You're the only one who came. That's what matters." He slid a folder across the table. It wasn't a contract, not yet, but it had numbers, percentages, a model, a roadmap to a deal where I, not Sabletech, would be the exclusive North American conduit for their chips. I didn't sign it that night, just held it. Later in my hotel room, I stared at the folder for hours. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of being seen, truly seen. I could still turn back, fly home, pretend this was a sightseeing detour gone sideways, but I knew better. This wasn't rebellion anymore, it was strategy. The summit was held in a building that looked like a Soviet-era aquarium, square, gray, and inexplicably humid. The main conference room had plastic chairs, an analog projector, and one sad ficus leaning like it knew its days were numbered. Vendors from all over the EU mingled in stiff suits, clutching branded USPs like they were sacred relics. I was the only American, the only woman over 40, and judging by the sidelong glances and raised brows, only one who hadn't brought a translator, a team, or a tie. Kovacs opened the morning session with a speech in Hungarian, then German, then broken English. He talked about supply chain integrity, future partnerships, and global realignments, all while pointedly avoiding any mention of Sabletech. My company, whose logo had once proudly sat on their marketing banners, now appeared only on a forgotten pamphlet near the buffet table, folded, stained, and sitting next to a bowl of hard candy. I spent the morning listening, scribbling notes I'd later have to decode, and watching two French reps whisper every time I asked a question. I was underdressed, outnumbered, and completely off the official schedule. Then, just before lunch, Kovacs approached me quietly. "Walk with me," he said. We stepped out onto the building's narrow balcony. The concrete cracked like old knuckles. Below us, town bustled with slow-moving trams and teenagers vaping behind kiosks. The air smelled of diesel and fried cabbage. He leaned on the railing like he was holding up the whole damn city. "I want this deal off their radar," he said without preamble. "Your company sent no one, again. They said the trip wasn't necessary," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. He chuckled once. Dry, humorless. "I sent them 4 emails, 2 calls. I got silence." I stayed quiet. There was no defense worth offering. "I'm old," he said, "too old to be disrespected by shiny men in clean suits who think logistics means shouting louder. I built my factory during blackouts. I soldered boards by candlelight, and still, they act like I'm disposable." His voice dropped low. "But you showed up, and you've always shown up." I looked away, staring out at the peeling paint on a distant billboard. "I'm not a distributor," I said. "Don't have the infrastructure." "I don't. You'll build it," he said. The wind kicked up. A loose paper napkin danced across the tiles and vanished over the edge. "Why me?" I finally asked. "Why trust me with this?" He turned to me, sharp as flint. "Because I don't trust them. I trust you. You understand loyalty. You understand people, and that's what this chip needs. Not more contracts, not more noise, just someone who gives a damn." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a single-page document. It was written in English and Hungarian with his personal letterhead stamped at the bottom. It wasn't a binding agreement, not yet, but it laid out the framework, the intention, that if we moved forward, I, Brittany Sharp, would serve as the sole distributor of his proprietary microchip in the U.S. market. He offered no pen. Instead, he held out his hand. A handshake. I stared at it. I pulsed. Deafening. This wasn't how things were done in boardrooms. There were supposed to be witnesses, legal review slide decks, Godam pie charts, but his hand stayed outstretched. And I saw the same thing I saw back in 2012 when he knelt beside his sick daughter, looked me in the eye, and said, "Thank you," like it cost him something. Terrified resolve is a strange emotion. It doesn't scream. It doesn't cry. It just acts. I took his hand. He gripped mine like iron and nodded once. The deal, our deal, was made. Afterward, I stepped into the bathroom and locked the door. My hands were shaking. My reflection looked alien, tired eyes, smeared eyeliner, and a smile I couldn't quite contain. I was no longer just Brittany the fixer. I was Brittany the disruptor. And back in Ohio, Tyler had no idea his invisible little logistics manager had just brokered the deal that would change everything. By the time I landed back in Columbus, I was running on 4 hours of plain sleep and the strange, electric calm that only follows irreversible decisions. I didn't go back to the office right away. I didn't even check my work email. Instead, I sat in my kitchen in sweats, hair tied up, my dog snoring against my thigh, and I opened the Secretary of State's website. It took 50 minutes to update my LLC documentation, another 5 to add authorized distributor under business activities. I paid the $99 processing fee like I was ordering takeout. Then I shut my laptop, stared at the wall, and just sat there. It felt like watching someone else's movie. 2 days later, I returned to work, silent and invisible as ever. No one asked where I'd been. No one noticed the jet lag buried under my concealer or the fact that I was wearing flats because my ankles were still swollen from 22 hours in coach. The office rolled on like a wheel that didn't know it was missing spokes. Tyler was already ramping up for the quarterly board meeting, what he lovingly referred to as his showtime. He commissioned a new slide deck from the marketing interns with flashy gradient backgrounds and swooping animations that made your eyes hurt. It was even a video reel with peppy music and a voiceover guy who sounded like he sold life insurance between rodeos. In one of the team huddles, he clicked through the slides and landed on one labeled Global Supply Chain Legacy Vendor Confidence. I nearly choked on my gas station coffee. Now this, he said, puffing his chest out like a cartoon rooster, is where we really shine. Kavox and his team are locked in for another 2 years. You've built a foundation of trust. Long-term vendor stability, folks. That's the name of the game. I stared at the slide. It had a bar graph. The bar labeled 2025 was shooting up like we just acquired a patent on eternal youth. My name? Nowhere. My report? Gutted and rewarded to sound like Tyler had personally massaged the vendor into compliance using only grit and charm. It was surreal. Like reading your own eulogy, written by the guy who stole your lunch from the communal fridge. Brittany, he said mid-meeting, great work on background support. Couldn't have done it without your spreadsheet thing. Everyone chuckled politely. I smiled. The same smile I wore when he called vendor calls gossip and logistics postman work. In the elevator afterward, one of the interns whispered that was such a killer slide. Did you make that data up or is it real? I just said, it's real enough. And walked out before they could follow up. Later that afternoon, I slipped into the unused conference room next to the printer. The one no one booked because the chair squeaked and the blinds were permanently tilted at an angle that made you feel watched. I pulled out the manila envelope Kavax had given me on the last day of the summit. Inside was a signed letter of intent, a summary of our handshake agreement, and a scanned notarized copy in Hungarian with a wax seal I didn't even know they still made. I opened a secure Dropbox folder under my LLC email, uploaded everything. Then I drafted an email to myself with the subject line, activate when ready. Attachments, vendor agreement draft, price sheet template, and a resignation letter so sharp it could slice glass. I didn't send it, not yet, but I knew it was coming. That night, I poured a glass of red wine that cost more than the airfare I'd just eaten and stood in my backyard under a sky that felt wider. Something in me had already left the building. My body was still showing up at 8:15 a.m., badge swipe and all, but my soul, my ambition, my loyalty, those had already moved into a new office, one with my name on the door. The quarterly board meeting opened with the usual parade of self-congratulations. We were in the 12th floor conference room, the one with the frosted glass and the $12,000 rug no one was allowed to walk on. Suits filed in with their Bluetooth earpieces, still buzzing, Starbucks in hand, eyes glazed with that caffeinated blend of arrogance and boredom. I took my seat near the back, close to the buffet table, where the cheese cubes were already sweating under fluorescent lights. I wore a navy blazer that said team player and black flats that said I know where the bodies are buried. No one noticed me. They never did, which was exactly how I wanted it. Tyler stood at the head of the table, laser pointer in hand, voice greased up and rolling like a car salesman at quota time. Now, as we move into Q4 projections, I want to highlight our most stable, vertical, legacy component sourcing. Click, slide, change. Thanks to years of smart vendor management, our European supply line is rock solid. I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek. Locked-in rates, guaranteed inventory, he continued. Frankly, it's one of the cleanest areas of our operation. At that exact moment, truly, as if the universe were playing conductor, a knock echoed against the glass doors. A man in a courier uniform stood there, holding a sealed envelope, tan and thick. With red ink across the front, personal and confidential to be opened by CEO, only the receptionist cracked the door and whispered something to one of the assistants. A minute later, the envelope was in the CEO's hands. He looked puzzled, then intrigued. Probably thought it was a thank you letter or a private invite to a startup's yacht launch. You know, CEO things. Then he opened it. His posture shifted in real time. shoulders collapsed inward, brows furrowed, jaw slacking like someone unplugged him mid-boast. The room, which had been filled with a low murmur of side chatter and coffee sips, felt eerily silent. He read the letter once, then again. Finally, without a word, he slid it across the table to the general counsel, a man who normally looked like he did crosswords during HR briefings. The lawyer took the page, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. The silence stretched. People fidgeted. Tyler shifted from foot to foot and fake laughed like it was all part of some surprise birthday plan. The lawyer blinked, slowly, then looked up at the CEO. "You weren't aware of this?" The CEO just shook his head. The lawyer turned back to the room and scanned the sea of suits until his gaze landed on me, the last person anyone would have thought to question. The spreadsheet girl. The vendor whisperer. The footnote in the PowerPoint. "Where is she?" he asked. I raised my hand, calm, steady, like I was answering a roll call. Tyler squinted at me, confused. "Brittany, what's going on?" I stood, smoothed my blazer, walked toward the head of the table, heels tapping like a metronome for doom. "Inside that envelope," I said, "is a notarized letter from Kavox Technologies." No one breathed. "The letter confirms that, as of this week, all future shipments to the United States will go exclusively through a single intermediary." Pause. "Let it burn. That intermediary is my company." Dead silence. "The kind you feel in your teeth, you mean?" "Through Sable Tech," Tyler finally asked, his voice climbing an octave it had no business visiting. I turned to him, not with anger, not with spite, just with truth. "No, through SharpPoint Logistics, LLC." The lawyer cleared his throat. "The letter also includes a scanned vendor agreement and a timeline for transition. Effective immediately." The CEO looked like someone had handed him a bomb disguised as a birthday card. Tyler sputtered, "But you can't just, what the hell is this?" I met his panic with something he hadn't seen in years. Control. "This is what happens," I said, "when you confuse loyalty with silence. I asked for $2,000 travel budget. You said no." Then I reached into my leather tote and pulled out 3 documents. My resignation letter, a notice of vendor transition, bound price list. I placed them neatly in front of the CEO. "Let's continue the meeting," I said. "You'll want to flip to the next slide. It's about your inventory assumptions." I walked back to my seat, but I didn't sit. I didn't sit because I wasn't coming back. Not to that chair, not to that room, not to that version of myself, the one who waited her turn, softened her voice, shrank her spine to fit in a space too small for her competence. That woman was gone, buried in a shallow grave of unpaid overtime and reheated team lunches. I walked to the center of the room, placed my hand on the CEO's chair, lightly, like claiming territory, and said, "There are 3 documents in the packet. First, my resignation letter, effective immediately." The CEO didn't look up. He was still staring at the vendor letter like it might rewrite itself if he blinked enough times. "Second," I continued. "Formal notice of distribution rights filed with the Hungarian Ministry of Trade and verified through the U.S. Commercial Liaison, all legal, all above board." The lawyer flipped through the folder, lips moving silently. He turned one page, then another, reached the notarized seal, paused. "It's airtight," he muttered. "Every clause is triggered. She holds exclusive representation." Tyler stepped forward like he thought physical proximity would change the facts. "You're bluffing," he snapped. "There's no way Kavox would cut us out. We're his longest partner. We built." "You built nothing," I said calmly. "You forwarded emails. You ignored the warning signs. You thought relationships ran on autopilot, but supply chains don't remember titles. They remember who shows up." He opened his mouth again, but the lawyer cut in. "She's not bluffing. This is enforceable. Her LLC is now the exclusive vendor representative for all North American transactions tied to this chip." There it was, my name, not whispered behind a cubicle or scribbled at the bottom of a Gantt chart, spoken aloud in a room full of people who'd once forgotten I existed. "SharpPoint Logistics, my company, my terms." "You don't understand what you've done," the CEO said, finally finding his voice, ragged like it had been dug up from 6 feet under. "You have investor commitments, production timelines, contracts built around continuity." "Then I suggest you update them," I replied, because continuity just took a different shape. The room felt heavier, like the oxygen had thickened. Phones stopped buzzing. No one moved. I turned to the intern by the screen. Poor girl looked like she just watched a live episode of Succession. "Could you please exit the slide deck? We're past the vendor stability section." She nodded and shut the laptop like it might bite her. I reached into my tote one last time and pulled out a single page, just one. A clean, itemized vendor pricing sheet. New rates, rush order fees, penalties for non-compliance, all 3 times what they'd been paying. No volume discounts. No grandfather clauses. "This," I said, laying it down like a dealer with the final hand, "is what stability costs now." The CEO didn't touch it. Tyler finally tried one last swing. "You're screwing the company. You realize that, right? You're nuking a 20-year partnership." I looked at him, And for once, I didn't smile. You're confusing self-preservation with sabotage. I gave you a chance to invest in loyalty. You called it a vacation. Then I turned back to the board and delivered the final blow. Not shouted, not dramatic, just firm. My title now is Principal Consultant and Authorized Distributor for SharpPoint Logistics. All component shipments will be routed through my firm, effective immediately. And if you'd like to negotiate, we can schedule time. But my availability fills up quickly. No one clapped. No one needed to. Power doesn't announce itself. It just enters the room and takes its seat. I collected my tote, nodded once, and walked to the door. Behind me, the lawyer leaned in toward the CEO and said something I couldn't quite hear. But I didn't need to, because I already knew the translation. You should have paid for the trip. I was almost at the door when Tyler finally found the courage to make one last swing, though calling it courage is generous. It was the kind of swing a drowning man makes, wild and flailing, all elbows and panic. This is extortion, he barked, his voice echoing off the glass walls like a fire alarm no one bothered to shut off. You're holding the company hostage. This is blackmail. I turned back slowly. One last look. The room was frozen in that uncanny valley between denial and comprehension, directors blinking in slow motion, legal flipping through documents like they were looking for a trapdoor. The intern had backed herself into the corner by the fruit platter, half a grape in her hand, fully traumatized. Extortion, I said, cocking my head, voice even? No, extortion is demanding money to fix a problem you created. I stepped back to the table, placed the price list neatly in front of the CEO like a waitress dropping off the check for a meal no one enjoyed but everyone ordered. This is business, the same business you refused to fund. I gave it a moment, let the silence swell like a balloon, then added, the same business you said wasn't worth $2,000 and a coach class seat to bake a saba. The CEO didn't touch the paper, but his eyes were fixed on the numbers. They were printed in bold, clean rows, no tricks, no small font, just facts. Base unit price, triple the previous rate. Rush order penalty, 40% surcharge. Inventory reservation fee, monthly, non-refundable. Technical support, outsourced and billed separately. Mint terms, net 7. Late fee, 8% per day. I saw it happen. The dawning. One director muttered something under his breath. Another leaned back in his chair like he just realized the floor wasn't solid. The VP of Finance adjusted her necklace 3 times in 30 seconds. No one met my eyes, because this was the moment they realized they weren't sitting at a table. They were standing at a cliff. This can't stand, Tyler hissed. We will go around you. Find another supplier. Well, you won't, I said flatly. His mouth opened, then shut. A fish at low tide. I leaned in just slightly, enough for only the front row to hear. There's one manufacturer of that chip. You knew that. You just never respected it. Now every order comes through SharpPoint. That's the new supply chain. You can either climb aboard or bleed out while the production lines dry up. The lawyer cleared his throat. Loud, uncomfortable. She's not bluffing, he said, voice grim. I checked the document trail. I cross-referenced her LLC registration with the Hungarian Trade Registry and the vendor's international licensing. It's valid. She's the only conduit. The CEO's lips were pale. The kind of pale that says I've made a mistake so massive it might echo through every quarterly report until I die. Still, he tried to keep face. What's your angle? He asked. You want revenge? A payout? A promotion somewhere else? I looked at him unblinking. I want you to feel it, I said. Every missed call, every ignored memo, every time you called my work background noise while quoting my results to the board. I want this company to feel what it's like to rely on someone it doesn't see, until it's too late. The room exhaled all at once, like everyone had been holding their breath since the courier walked in. Tyler sat down, not like he was defeated, more like he'd been unplugged. Spine slack, ego leaking out through the soles of his Italian shoes. And then, just to make sure the wound stayed open, I added, you called it a vacation. This is the souvenir. No one laughed, not even the intern, because in that moment, they all understood the same singular thing. Arrogance isn't bulletproof. It just hasn't met the invoice yet. The room had the stillness of a courtroom mid-verdict. No shuffling, no coffee slurps, not even the nervous tap of pen. Just 20-some executives staring at a single sheet of paper sitting between the CEO's hands like it might bite him. The amended order form. It listed the minimum volume commitment, new shipping schedule, and my new pricing structure in stark, clinical black and white. No fluff, no loopholes, just numbers, cold and uncompromising, like winter steel. A mirror held up to a boardroom that had spent too many years congratulating itself for breathing. The CEO stared at it for what felt like an hour. His right hand hovered above the signature line. The kind of hesitation you only see when a man realizes his empire has a landlord now. Then he picked up the pen. It trembled slightly. Enough to notice, not enough to excuse. One stroke at a time, he signed his name. I watched as the ink dried in real time, sealing a new era with all the grace of a funeral. He didn't look up, didn't speak. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I collected the signed form, folded it once, and slid it into the leather portfolio I'd bought 15 years ago at a clearance sale, back when I still thought climbing the ladder meant something if you smiled enough and said thank you, even when you were bleeding. Then I turned toward the door. Tyler sat hunched in his chair, face pale, jaw tight. His tie had loosened. His reputation was unraveling like a cheap cardigan caught in a snowblower. I walked past him without a glance. No eye contact, no last word, not even a smirk. He wasn't worth the punctuation. I reached the door, opened it slowly, let the sunlight pour in like judgment. For 1 second, just when I paused half in, half out, my heels on their carpet, my name in their mouths, my deal in their hands, then I said it. Soft, clear, final. You thought the trip was too expensive. Now you get to find out what cheap really costs. And I walked out. Not fast, not triumphant, just steady. The way someone walks when they no longer carry anything that doesn't belong to them.